and this is something to keep in mind as far as soil testing and liming, it depends on a lot about what you're growing. If you're growing tomatoes, if you're planning on growing tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers, they need more calcium than, say, corn does. And we'll get into it just a little bit about some of the disorders you get with these vegetables when your nutrients are not right. That, you know, we'll cover that. So a lot of it depends on, you know, how heavy. Are you just doing like a spring garden and by July or August you've got it all cleaned out? Or are you going to be real intensive and grow this, and then this fall put in greens and broccoli and that sort of thing? And it's how much, it's kind of a management situation, how much you're doing that. Your pH, when it's too low, what elements are tied up and not available to plants, or when it's too high, what you know. And so if somebody just has never done a soil test, but they've heard from their neighbor, you need to lime. Well, if you lime every year, boom, 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 next thing you know, you have gotten it too high. So you can get, I know that question was earlier, you can get your pH too high. Now, it's more common in this area for it to be too low, you know. One of the keys when it comes to vegetable production is pollination. And Tim Messier, and I really trust his knowledge and comments, said that we're very blessed that we do have a good population of native bees. And, you know, there's been all this stuff talked about and everything else, and sometimes we don't see them quite as much, and it seemed like last year we didn't see them quite as often. But we do have native bees, and that's why when you're working in the garden, you need to be very careful about what you're applying and what time of day and things like that, because without that little critter right there, we wouldn't have our vegetable crops. Now, the bumblebee, other bees also help pollinate, not just honeybees. But honeybees are the most different flower parts, your pistils and your stamen, and you got to get that pollen from there to there for it to go down to create and have that fruit. And you know, if you get really adventurous and you don't see much bee activity, and that's one of the things I think that is a key, regardless of what you're doing, is being out in that garden. You know, every 2 or 3 days, just being out there, noticing what's going on, seeing how things are growing. If you don't see many bees, if you want to kind of experiment a little bit, you know, maybe get your little artist paintbrush kind and try to take some pollen from here and put over there, just to try to help pollination along. And that is one way in developing hybrids and new varieties. They do that. They will, you know, take pollen from one to the other, and then maybe even put a bag over it because they don't want it mixed in until they get that perfect mixture. But it's just an experiment to try to do if you don't see much bee activity. As you can see here, where it's crushed in right there, misshapen there, misshapen there, that's all due to poor pollination. Because if you think about a cucumber, for example, how many seed are in a cucumber? If it doesn't get doesn't have good pollination, when it's building that food around that seed, you end up with that misshapen there and there. And the thing about it is, and we talked a little bit about this the other day, that you know, if there's a lot of stuff blooming at one time, it's good, you know, it's a good attraction for bees. But sometimes, you know, they may see these big ones and stay here. But you want, you know, if you've got a lot of stuff blooming together, you get a lot of better pollination. Several plants that really depend on it. Tomatoes are pretty good about not being too bad, but squash is one of the worst ones about pollination. And you saw the melons, cucumbers, cantaloupe, and things like that. And if you'll notice, seemed like last year, and I don't know why, that was a big problem we had last year with the squash. that bloom would come on there, and they're only open for like 72 hours. And if it doesn't get pollinated, it's going to fall off. And people were concerned, was it overwatering, underwatering, this or that? And I would ask them, were you out there? No, I didn't see any bees. And that's just it. Whether they were going to flower somewhere else or something like that, but it was not getting pollinated, and that flower was falling off before that fruit started growing. Okay, when you start talking about insect and disease control, the key is identification. Now, how many have seen that critter right there? It's got 2 or 3 different names. It's commonly called a tomato hornworm, tobacco worm, several things like that. And even in this picture where it's concentrating, you can see that it sometimes is hard to pick him out. And if you ever get him in there, your tomato plants will be gone. And I got tickled. A fellow in McCaysville a couple years ago said, I had this bug, and I was just kind of curious. I was enjoying watching him. You know, he said the next day I didn't have any leaves. I mean, he just had wiped it out. And then I had another lady that didn't see it. It was camouflaged. And now the way she can tell, she's got a small garden, but the way she can tell is whatever term you want to use, whether you want to say frass or droppings or poop or whatever, it's like pepper. So if she had it on a deck, and whenever she would see the pepper look stuff down there, she'd go scouring through her plants to try to find it, and would find it. So that is one that you have to really be careful for. How many have seen that situation? Any idea what that is?
Bee larvae, aren't they?
Yep.
I had to look it up.
If you can see right here, these white, that's from a braconid wasp, and it has laid eggs in that caterpillar, and the larvae will feed on the caterpillar and eventually will complete its life cycle. And this is one of those catch-22s. The lady that had the small garden that I would talk to, she would pick them off and save them so they could go through the life cycle and have them, because it takes a while for it to kill it, and if you leave it there, it might defoliate your plant. But that's the way if you hear the term beneficial insect, you know, that you let that wasp do its thing and kill the worm through what we call through a beneficial insect. The trouble, like I said, it's not a fast kill, and it may defoliate it, you know, but if you ever see that, as weird as it looks, it's really beneficial. When it comes to insect control, the thing that you've got to do, there's 2 or 3 things you have to do. Number one, you have to decide, is it a harmful or is it a beneficial? If it's harmful like that worm, okay, then you have to decide what type of mouth part it has. A mouth part, and I'm not talking about getting does it eat the leaves or does it suck the juices out of the leaves? Does it have a piercing sucking mouth part or does it have a chewing mouth part? That, because there are chemicals that will do one and not the other. So in the case of the worm, Sevin or carbaryl is the chemical name, is effective for that because it ingests it and is killed that way. If it were, and I don't think I've got a picture, if it were a aphid that suck, or some of them call them plant lice, that suck the juices out, you need something that's going to get in that leaf and in the juice of that leaf so that when it sucks it in, that's going to ingest the poison and is killed that way. So the way that critter feeds is how you determine the control. Now, Sevin is one. It's been around a long time. It's very safe, and you can look online and find certain sections. You can call if you want to buy the whole thing. It's $15, and it's got household insects, vegetables, fruit, the whole, the whole thing. And that's what I try to refer to make sure. But you've got to identify the bug first of all. And then it also, like with 7, in all of these, it's got like a re-entry time. How long after you spray before you can get back around and work in the garden? How long after you spray can you? 7 is one, that you can, and just like we talked about on the test last week, that's something you can spray today and pick the same day. There are others that may have, a couple of week waiting period or 10 days. Now, homeowner products are not quite as bad, but some of the stuff that the commercial farmers have to use, it might have a 21-day or a 40-day harvest from the time it sprays till they can harvest it. So they have to kind of plan ahead. But with the insect control, in addition to 7, the other product that is used quite a bit is called BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. And it is not an insecticide. Dipel, you may see that brand name on there as far as Dipel, but BT, what it does, it gives the worm a disease, and it kills it that way. So it's not an insecticide. It's a little bit slower acting than an insecticide, but a lot of people like it because it doesn't have the insecticide in it. And then when I was mentioning aphids and white flies, things like that suck the juices out, malathion. Or something like insecticidal soap. Insecticidal soap, the way it works, it covers the pest, and as it dries, it suffocates it. There again, it's not quite as fast acting, but it is effective if you, number 1, catch it early enough, and then number 2, do a very good job of getting a good sprayer. A sprayer that, where you can get you one and get on the underside of leaves and cover them, and coverage makes a big difference on that.
Could we mix 7 and BT to just cover our
Yeah.
bases?
Mm-hmm.